Zoe, this is Gino Wickman, author of many awesome books, including Shine, his most recent work of art. And it's my joy to introduce him to you. And maybe we can have a little chat about entrepreneurship on the collegiate level, which you are. Maybe share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then let's engage with Gino.
Hey Gino, nice to meet you.
You
I
as
was
well.
so moved when I read Shine, and I'm aware of your other books. I don't know. I received Traction actually as a gift when I was 17, and it was a little bit too advanced for me to understand, but it's always sat on my shelf. And then when Steve told me about Shine, I was like, wait, I know who this is. This is so cool. But Shine was just a wonderful, wonderful read, and it really moved me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and I can't wait to ask you questions that can hopefully help other student entrepreneurs that are at my age and are in this really weird pivotal time period in their life.
Mm, fantastic. Well, I look forward to the conversation. I'm very excited.
Yeah. Um, so we started talking about this a little bit before, but I was most moved by the overarching concept of the difference between ego and love and making choices out of ego or choices out of love,
Mm,
right? And I feel like a lot of us, we always put up this until we consciously correct it. We put up false fronts, which you describe as ego to
mhm.
protect ourselves.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe imagine yourself as an 18 to 20-year-old again and the best piece of advice? I know it's in your book, but best piece of advice that you could give an 18 to 22-year-old. I'm 22.
Sure. Oh boy, taking myself back to 18 to 20 years old. Well, here's what I'd love to do as I answer that question. And so I'm a fanatic about creating context. So anybody, listening into this conversation, I think it's really important to paint a picture. And like I said, create some context as I start to answer these questions so that they're rooted in the context. And so I'm going to take a really big step back, if I may, and then I'm going to come right back to answering your question, because I think it's really important for anyone listening in to this conversation to understand that I've created 5 pieces of content in the world, and each one has a corresponding book. And so I'm passionate about helping entrepreneurs. And the reason I want to start here is just to share and help you understand the point. And so very quickly, the first piece of content is called Entrepreneurial Leap. It's for anyone who thinks they're an entrepreneur and is scratching their head wondering if this is for them. This is most of your audience, obviously. And what it helps them do is determine if this is right for them becoming an entrepreneur, and then ultimately taking their entrepreneurial leap and starting a better startup, increasing their odds of success, and heading off half the issues that they're going to face and problems they'll solve. The second piece of content is called Rocket Fuel, and that's for when that entrepreneur, who then becomes a visionary, as I call it, needs to find their integrator counterpart, this person that counterbalances them to grow the business to the next level. The third piece of content is called EOS, or a book, Traction, that I wrote that then helps that entrepreneur run a better business, truly run their business like a Swiss watch and get everything they want from their business. The fourth piece of content I call the EOS life. It's helping that entrepreneur live their ideal life, which is doing what they love, with people they love, making a huge impact, making a lot of money, and having time for other passions. And then there's the fifth piece of content where we're going to spend our time today on, and that's called Shine. And in Shine are the 3 discoveries to free your true self and the 10 disciplines to maximize your energy, impact, and inner peace. So I know that's a mouthful, but the point I'm making in those 5 pieces of content is what I just articulated is the life of the entrepreneur. And I'm so excited about speaking to your audience because they are at the beginning of that journey. And each piece of content that I shared is purposely kind of in a linear fashion because that's typically the entrepreneur's climb. What's interesting about today's conversation is shine is at the end, the fifth piece of content, because what typically happens is that entrepreneur climbs the mountain, succeeds in their outer world, gets up there, but unfortunately they're not feeling fulfilled in their inner world, which starts to get to the question that you asked. The beauty of this conversation is what I'm hoping is that we can touch and reach and ping these entrepreneurs in the making in the early stage of the climb and find that inner peace early, where most of us entrepreneurs, we just don't. Unfortunately, we got to get to the top of the mountain, have that success, and then look inside. So with that said, hopefully that paints a nice picture, because I think in this conversation, we're going to come back to some of those pieces of content, and I wanted to make sure that that context was clear. And so what we're talking about now is the inner world and reaching that entrepreneur early. So now there's the first big piece of context. So now as we get into the depth of this, you're asking a question, about ego and love. And so the next kind of subcontext, as I mentioned in the book Shine, are the 3 discoveries to free your true self. And that's really what it's all about, is freedom, freeing these driven entrepreneurs to fully be themselves in the world. And the 3 discoveries, real high level, are discovering that I am driven. Discovery number 2 is understand that all decisions are made out of love or fear. And then discovery number 3 is to understand that you can be driven and have peace. And I'm hoping we'll spend a little time on each one of those discoveries, but you're asking about discovery number 2. And so let's now go there and answer your question, because this was one of my greatest discoveries. And so we driven people. And so if any of you out there that are becoming entrepreneurs, if you're going to become a successful entrepreneur, you are driven. In other words, it's in your DNA, it's who you are. And so with that, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. And so the curse side is we do a lot of damage to ourselves and others with our intensity. And so as we now go there, it's all about self-awareness and understanding that there are things that have happened to us in our lives that we have held onto. And so now coming back to your question, ego and love, I like to describe it this way to create a little context here. And so what I believe is we driven entrepreneurs, we have the souls of driven entrepreneurs. In other words, there's no escaping it. We have this beautiful internal force. I call it true self. You could call it soul. You could call it energy. You could call it spirit, whatever works for you out there. But we have this power source inside of us, and it wants out and it wants to be free. And so with that, the idea is to free that. But our ego typically has our true self, i.e. soul, trapped in there. And I like to create an image of a cocoon, if you will. And this cocoon is just simply our ego protecting us. It's created a protective layer. And the things that have happened to us in our lives, we tend to hang on to them. And our ego is just being a good protective parent. It's just trying to protect us from ever having those experiences again. So its intentions are good. Unfortunately, it just leads to us creating these structures that are trying to protect us from the world. And so we're never really totally free. And so I'll pause there and see where that takes us next. Floor is yours.
Right. I totally agree with that. We create our own shackles, right? The whole goal of being an entrepreneur, well, major goal, to help people and to create our own lives for ourselves, right? And then we end up being our own jailer in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like Steve says, the biggest challenge is in between here, right? Like, I think you say that, right, Steve?
Exactly. Years.
And figuring out how to unlock that freedom is such a powerful, powerful thing. And our age, right, 18 to 22, you often find yourself having to say yes because you're getting on your feet. You need to say yes. You can't really always say no because you need the opportunities, right? You're not successful necessarily yet. So knowing how can you protect yourself during that period where it's not really an option to say no because you need that to succeed. So I think it's a balance. It's definitely a balance on how to protect yourself and how to prioritize what to say yes to. And
Yeah. And if I may, I want to jump in on that point right there, because here's what I know from experience. I know that there's a point in your life that you will be pinged and confront this thing, and you can start to shed that ego. Okay. And so my real work started at like age 50. That's when I had my awakening, as I described it. With that said, I know it's possible. It took me until age 50. What I hope, and I can only say it from a theoretical standpoint because I haven't seen it enough, but what I believe is people can be pinged sooner. They can have their awakening sooner. It's what's happening for you. And so this is why this conversation is so exciting, and the age range that we're talking to right now. So the best way I can describe this is if we can, in this conversation, articulate this very powerful experience, what's possible, I think that we will kind of wake people up sooner, and we'll have more and more examples of people that understand it. But again, I can only speak from the experience of being 50. And here's the worst case scenario. And I always like to let everybody off the hook out there. Worst case scenario, going back to that entrepreneurial climb, you take your entrepreneurial leap, you build a $50 million company, you make a whole bunch of money, and at 50 years old, you finally have your awakening. That ain't so bad. I just really hope and believe you can do it in your 20s, because the sooner you can shed that ego, understand it, I think the faster you're going to find inner peace. And I think you'll be more driven, and you'll do more good in the world, and you'll build a company faster. So that's what I believe is possible. And that's what I hope this is going to spark in this.
I agree with you. I noticed a difference within myself. I find myself, when I'm making choices, I'll question, am I doing this out of ego and fear or out of love?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel something deep within me, and I notice a huge shift in myself mentally since reading this book. I started reading it over the summer, and this summer was just a huge awakening for me. So I fully agree with you. I believe it's totally possible because I've experienced it myself, and I can't wait to even experience more. But sometimes I feel like my words don't always have a lot of weight. You and Steve are both extremely successful, and hearing it from extremely successful people that you can do this, that you can find this inner peace, that you can be free and still be successful, and you can kind of have it all, is really, really powerful. Because I could say it till I'm blue in the face, but some of them listen to me, some of them, but your words have so much weight. So I'm so moved and grateful that you're taking the time to do this, because I know how powerful your impact and your words are.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Steve, you were about to say something. Did you want to jump in there? And by the way, a question for you. I'm having my sprinklers blown out right now. Can you hear that background noise?
No.
Okay, thank goodness. It's in the distance, but it's a annoying noise that I'm hoping you're not picking up right now.
We're able to filter out, and you're on all different soundtracks, so we can filter
And
it out.
it's going to stop in a minute or two. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't picking that up.
You're perfect. So back to the podcast. So Stephen Covey says, start with the end in mind. And I've realized or noticed that students nowadays are very mindful of work-life balance. It's become part of their vocabulary. I think it's on the SATs now, right? And it's like, really, and second portion, as you were speaking, is that Zoe likes to call herself a chameleon because she turns on and off something. So I just wanted to ask you two questions. One is, if you were starting over again, Gino, as an entrepreneur, would you start with Shine first,
Mm.
Or would you go all the way to the first book? Because again, Covey says, start with the end in mind. Perhaps that's what it is. And then Zoe, if you get a chance, just please talk about your chameleonness.
Yeah. Well, let's start. How would I do it if I could do it over again? First of all, those 5 pieces of content and the 8 books that I've written were definitely not written in that order. So yes, if I go back in time, I would definitely, write Entrepreneurial Leap first, Rocket Fuel second, EOS and Traction third, EOS Life fourth. But you're asking the $1 million question, Shine. Yes, with everything I know now, of course I would write Shine first. But here's the reality of what's going on. It would have been revolutionary 20 years ago when I started writing books. People are starting to wake up to this, but the reality of the greater driven entrepreneurial world, the millions of driven entrepreneurs out there, most of them are not ready for this conversation. And I'm speaking from experience. So yes, I would write it first, but it would be revolutionary. It currently is right now because it's still kind of cutting edge in the early stages. But that's the ideal order. That's why, again, I'm so excited about this conversation. If I could find every 18-year-old and show them how to get pinged at 18, oh my goodness, what a world it would be 50 years from now.
Thank you.
So, I call myself a chameleon. I've used that term, and I know you have it in your book as well, but I've used it before that. And going back to what you were speaking about a little bit ago about intensity and the damage that we cause with our intensity, I often have found myself showing up with too much intensity and people mistake it for aggression, or I don't even know, but they mistake it for something more malicious, and it's not malicious at all. It's me being passionate about something and me wanting as excellent as we can do, right? And I don't even always realize that I'm doing this. So I've had to chameleon myself, that's what I call it, to fit in different groups and be able to communicate with different people to break it down for them. And it's a strain for me because I am introverted and I've gotten good at it. I've gotten really, really good at it. I made it one of my goals in college to try to master that, on how to communicate with different people. But I feel it is a common problem that entrepreneurs and highly driven people face. So I guess maybe you could give your own experience and how you've been a chameleon and how you've curbed the intensity, because I know you have to be intense to accomplish what you've accomplished. And I could tell through your emails, and even your team is very intense too. It radiates. It's amazing. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, well, first I'll share a personal story. And it was when I was 30 years old, my wife threw me a 30th surprise birthday party. And so I walk into this house and 100 sets of eyeballs yell surprise. And I look around that room and I saw 6 factions of my life around that room. And so I saw my family, my wife's family, my business partners, my employees, my high school friends, and my new friends. And I looked around the room and I said, holy shit, who am I going to be today? I mean, I literally realized I was 6 different people for each one of those factions. And so I too was being a chameleon. We have our clients say the same thing, where they really talk about being a chameleon, but they see it as a gift, a skill set, and the truth of the matter, it's really not. It's hard for me to say that, but at the end of the day, we should be ourselves. And so in that situation, I said to myself, from this day forward, I'm going to just be me, because think of the energy that's being burnt when I have to change myself 6 different times for 6 different people. And I just went forward from that day and really went to work on shedding layers to truly be myself and just feel comfortable in my own skin, and didn't feel like I had to be different for different people. And so there's my chameleon story. And we'll come back to shedding layers because there's a couple more things I want to share there. But now let's go to the intensity, okay? And so as I learn to be my true self, yes, I'm an intense person. But here's what I've learned, okay? I've learned that I can be too intense. Like somebody said it to me this way, which was really helpful when I heard it. This goes back about 15 years ago. And she says to me, Gino, the intensity is not needed. Now, it was great advice from a standpoint of I can be really intense. I know how to turn that on and use it masterfully and artfully, quite frankly. But what I realize is there's this balance of being too intense and making the people, helping the people in my life become aware that that intensity is part of who I am. And so they learn to accept and understand me, but I've also learned, I'm so aware of it now that it's like, you know, with my kids, do I really need to be that intense on a vacation trying to accomplish every single thing that I've hoped we would accomplish on the vacation? It becomes less fun for them, you know, and then you can turn that back to employees and business partners and things like that. There's just there's such a thing as too much. So with that, what I find is the people in my life are just more understanding and accepting that I'm an intense guy. But at the same time, my responsibility in that relationship is to tone it down, you know, where it should be toned down. So that's how I kind of manage my intensity.
So question, piggybacking off of that,
Yeah.
do you think, because sometimes I'm intense because I'm passionate about something, but I'm also found that I can be intense because it comes from a place of ego, becomes from a place of fear, right? I want to go into something, I want to be successful in it, I have to be successful in it. So that radiates out of me as well. Do you think, have you seen that before?
No, that's really good. And so you're making me think because my intensity very much comes from passion. And again, that's where the people in our lives, you got to meet them halfway, you know, them understanding you and understanding it's coming from passion. It's more accepting. In other words, they learn that I'm not angry, even though I have an angry look on my face. I'm just passionate. So that side, I really get what you're saying. The ego side, let's bring insecurity into it, you know, fear of judgment, things like that, bringing that into the intensity. That's really interesting. So it's very profound, you know, at your young age and experience for you to have that awareness is very powerful because I don't know that I've ever really thought about that, but I can see where when I'm feeling insecure or uncomfortable or not at my best or making shit up, you know, yeah, I can see where, but I never really described it as intensity, but I guess outside looking in, it could absolutely come off as intensity because, yeah, I think I do like turn it up a couple notches when I'm trying to overcome insecurity. So it's really insightful for you to see that. And I just learned something there, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's when you show up, but how is it being perceived by other people? And we've all had things where we have a project or a deadline and we want to own it. We want to, for whatever reason, we want to be really successful, whether it be passion, whether it be ego, whether who knows, right? And you show up and you want to win this, right? So
Yeah. And again, it's really important. The thing that I just learned there, and it's such a great thing for anyone listening in, is the tie to ego there. Again, in my situation where I'm turning it up a few notches to try to overcome insecurity, to right there at that moment, be aware and conscious and saying, I'm feeling insecure, I'm amped up, taking that deep breath, and almost to whoever that audience is saying, you know, right now I don't have all the answers, but we will come up with the answers. To just shift that, all of a sudden that intensity goes down 5 clicks. I'm a little more calm. I'm now a better version of myself for the people in my life. So that's really, really, really cool and insightful.
thank you.
I'd like to share something about Zoe. She's an INFJ on the Myers-Briggs, same as me. She had an accident, a brain accident when she was younger.
Wow.
And I think it rattled a very mature soul. But a person is very insightful. She was not able to go to school for a long period of time.
Wow.
And so she is about the most aware person, and she's a seeker of how do I impact others? How does this, what is my intensity when I'm with people? And what we worked on this summer when she was interning was trusting her empathy, her intuition, and she's really ramped that up quite a bit. And I love this intensity conversation, which I had construed as perfection when I was 40. Living in a world of perfection, I gave up perfection for 10 years. And what I learned was that I was not satisfied with anything. So then I learned to focus it only on things that deserve that intensity. And I call it the magnifying glass. Like, what deserves my energy right now? Because otherwise it's all over the place. And so I've been mentoring Zoe, and she's such a quick learn. I mean, she is just right there with us along the way of being able to evolve out. And her intuition really carries her very far because now she trusts it. And her intensity, I think she's able to channel it much better instead of annoying people like we can do. So
yeah, and I'd love to, I want to share one more thing about intensity and then move us in another direction, if I may, because I'm going to bring us back to ego on this. But the other little aha that I want to share that I've learned is, again, with the intensity, when I know I'm being intense, it's this awareness thing. Because again, it has positives, it has benefits, it is effective when you're aware of it. And so, for instance, when I'm in a session with my clients, which I do a lot of sessions with my clients, or I'm doing a talk, I just did a very intimate talk with 45 entrepreneurs. In my sessions, in that talk, I can get intense, but I'm so aware of it that I will literally say, just so you know, this is just passion. I'm not angry. And so I'm able to kind of disarm anything that might be negative, coming off as negative. So again, it's just simply awareness is what I'm talking about. In this talk that I did, about an hour and a half in, it got a little intense, but I was just making this very strong point so that they would get it. And at that point, I typically have it the same way of saying it, where I'm saying, now I'm not angry. I love you and I want you to be great. So that's what this is. So again, there's just a way of being aware. And so on the subject of awareness, when we are aware as driven entrepreneurs, it's very powerful. And so now I'd love to take us back to this ego conversation. And I want to just create a little context here and do the best I can to articulate it in its purest form in terms of the way that we teach it in the book Shine. And I'm just curious what this prompts for you and what questions you want to dig into this. Because again, we're spending our time right now in this discovery number 2, that all decisions are made out of love or fear. Okay. And so when we say love or fear, we then switch those two words. So love, fear. So we call love your true self or your soul or getting into your body or your intuition. We call fear the mind or the ego. And so if you can see those two things, as we already talked about, what then tends to happen is our ego traps our true self, our driven souls, in a cocoon trying to protect us from the world. Well, now what I want to do is just kind of take you 4 levels deep into understanding that dynamic, but also how to free yourself, because that's what this whole conversation is about. And so with that basic understanding, and if you're picturing that cocoon, your ego wrapped around your true self or your soul protecting you, your true self is trapped in there. You are not free when your ego is running the show. And so if we then take it down a few levels, it's first understanding that your true self is in there. If you can take yourself to seeing that visual and understand that our ego has our true self trapped in a prison, i.e. the cocoon. From there, once we understand that that power source is trapped inside of you, it's now an understanding that we can free that power source. And the next understanding is to understand that we are pure energy. We beings walking this earth are pure energy. It's scientific. Google it. You can't argue with it. And so the point is, as energy, we either burn very bright as beings or we don't burn so bright. And it's kind of sad and painful. But when we don't burn bright, it's when our ego has us trapped in that prison. And the beauty is we can burn bright. And it's just understanding that the reason you're not burning bright is because your ego has you trapped and has you kind of in a grip. When you understand that, the beauty is to understand that the reason you're not burning bright is it's just blocked energy, and you can unblock that energy. And the way you unblock that energy is to look at the places in the history in your life when you had situations that you're still hanging on to. Typically bad things that happen, also good things. You know, the person at 60 years old that still talks about their football days in high school, that's somebody who's trapped on a bunch of good stuff that happened back then, but they're trapped in their ego. So it's good and bad stuff, but usually it's bad stuff, and it's trauma, and it's just conditioning from our parents and society. But nonetheless, it's understanding, what am I hanging on to from the past? What is my ego protecting me from never feeling again? And it's just understanding that those are blocks, and those blocks can be removed. There's 1,000 ways to remove them, but it's confronting it, experiencing it, and letting it go. And you can do that, like I said, through 1,000 ways. We can dig deeper into that if you'd like. And when you understand that, then it's really all about just being aware. So now I'm taking us all the way back to that awareness point. And as we go forward, as Eckhart Tolle said, with awareness comes transformation and freedom. If we can just start to become aware, like you said, Zoe, you're starting to understand when the decision is coming from love or when it's coming from fear. Just understanding that, being aware, being conscious, being present, all of a sudden when you realize it's fear-based, you can chase down why, what is the thing that happened in the past that's making me make this fear-based decision? And it's going to the root and shedding that. And each time you shed that, I describe it as shedding a layer. It's where you're bringing down that ego structure, that protective cocoon. And all of a sudden, if you just shift 10% more love-based decisions than fear-based decisions, it's like a Richter scale. It's going to be transformative for your life. And so the idea is just to keep shedding layers as they come up. And again, starting that at 18, 20, 22 years old, oh my God, what a gift to the world if you can all start doing that now. And so I just wanted to share that context to see what that prompted.
So you said there's hundreds of ways, and I'm aware of some of them, but what is the most accessible way to remove trauma, would you say, that college kid can do it in their dorm right now?
Well, so the most accessible way, that's a tricky question, because here's what I've learned. It's different for everyone. And so my prescription to everyone that is ready to start this work and go on this journey and really confront these blocks is to just start by saying, I'm ready to confront this. And so please present to me a solution. Okay, if you just intention, just say, I want to start working on this, put in front of me a solution, ask the universe for an answer, and one of 1,000 things are going to present themselves to you. Because, you know, certainly a very popular one is therapy. I'm not recommending therapy for everyone, but therapy is a way to confront this stuff. And so again, for the college student that's sitting there in their dorm, they can't go run and find a therapist. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But, you know, I will tell you, for me personally, I did therapy in my 20s, in my 40s, in my 50s, and it worked okay in my 20s and 40s, but I was not ready to be honest with myself. If you're going to consider therapy, you got to be ready to just open the kimono, let your guard down and let it fly. And it's just not going to work well if you're not ready to do that. Well, I was ready in my 50s. And so therapy was very, very profound for me. Another thing that was helpful for me was a couple of very amazing books. So a book can do this for you. So a book called Letting Go by David Hawkins, and another book called Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Those two books were very profound for helping me understand this structure that I'm describing and really starting to, you know, confront these things. Plant medicine is a very popular tool for this, but I always caution with plant medicine, it shouldn't be used for recreational purposes. It should be used for clinical purposes. And so this is being brought into the clinical world, and the studies show it's net neutral for people, but you've got to take it serious. You've got to do the work. You've got to do the integration. But all it does is simply turns off your ego for 3 to 4 hours, and you see what life is like without an ego. Then you got to do the real work. And so I could keep going. We give about 40 resources in the book Shine, but you've got to find the way that works best for you, because what I also believe is once somebody understands this context that I'm describing, this structure, I believe there are people that are going to shed all their shit like within minutes. I really believe it's possible, because once you understand that they're all just stories you're hanging on to, okay, and some of them are brutally painful. I was sexually abused by older boys in the neighborhood when I was young. There's painful shit that we have from the past, but you can let it go. It happened. In other words, it's just a story we're hanging on to. I'm not a bad person because that happened. I didn't do anything wrong, because it's just life. And every single one of these life situations that happen, they're lessons to teach us something. When we can shift to understanding that, wow, what is possible? So there's best answer I have for you on the one way, because there just isn't one way, but there's some thoughts for you.
Besides read Shine, of course.
And I urge you
Besides
to
read
read
that, of
Shine.
course.
Absolutely.
One thing that also helped me well, I'd like to share the analogy that came to mind when you were talking about the cocoon and the true self. And when I went through it and I experienced it this summer, it was like it hit me and I was like ready. And I felt like my energy was an exposed nerve for a little bit. And I'm hyper aware of everything. And it was a really cool, interesting feeling. Definitely a little bit more emotional. I was picking up on things, but it died down gradually. But it opened my eyes to thinking, and the acceptance of being vulnerable was really powerful for me. And it's hard. It's very, very hard to be vulnerable. Very hard. I don't think a lot of people realize it. We see, my generation especially, we see people on social media and they're pouring their hearts out, and it's become kind of, they're nonchalant about it. And it's easy to attack on social media. People are in their own little bubbles of social media. So sharing that vulnerability and that energy of vulnerability is so powerful. So I just want to thank you for sharing this in your book and what you just shared with us right now. So powerful. And it's incredibly impactful that you are able to do that. If you can do that, if Steve can do that, 18, 20-year-olds that are just starting out can work to do that if they are.
Yeah, and if I may, grabbing that point, so it's frankly terrifying to be that vulnerable, especially when you're where Steve and I are, where we've built businesses, we have a following, we have a reputation, and all of a sudden you're running the risk of hurting that reputation by saying, hey, by the way, I'm also human, because rarely do we show the human side as we're building what we're building. And I just decided, screw it. I'm going to just be human. I've got flaws. I am not perfect. So, but you prompted a couple other things on that. First of all, I also forgot to share meditation was also very, very profound for me in shedding. So I do a lot of shedding during meditation, because what happens with meditation is I urge and recommend 30 minutes a day for everyone. But what happens is when you sit and calm yourself down and go into your body, your soul knows exactly what to do, and it's pushing this stuff out, and so stuff's going to come up. And it's the reason that most people struggle with meditation, because it's when the soul starts to stir in that silence, they just want to push it right back down and get the hell out of there. So meditation is very powerful. And then another thing that dawned on me is we have a podcast called the Shed and Shine podcast. And so we're having these conversations. But the point I'm making about the podcast is, it's interesting watching what happens for people that listen to episodes, because, maybe we're 30 episodes in, we just started it this year, but the profound feedback we'll get where, episode 7 didn't do something for someone, but episode 12 did, because that's where they are. And so this point I make about just simply say, you want a resource. Tell the universe you're looking for a resource. It will present itself to you at the right time in the right way. And you just never know what it's going to be, because it's not what your best friend did. It's not what your parent did. It's not what it's always different for everyone. And so that's the point about the episodes. They just hit the same person a different way on that right episode. And so that might ping you there. And then the last thing that you prompted is just about the subject of vulnerability. I got my vulnerability ping somewhere around 35, but it is terrifying to truly be vulnerable, because what we're talking about is truly being vulnerable. And I call it open and honest, just being open, where you're just opening yourself up to anything, which is terrifying because you're also opening your heart, but also being honest, telling the kind truth. So it goes both ways, but just truly being vulnerable in receiving and being vulnerable in giving. And when you bring up the internet and social media, what it makes me think of is, I get a little nervous about, trauma parties and trauma fests and people just spewing their trauma for sport, which is not healthy. So
mindsets.
yeah, I call it telling your inner story, and so for me, what I decided to do, and I tell my full inner story in this book, I decided to be vulnerable and just put myself out there and tell my inner story to the entire world. I don't believe everyone should do that. Okay. It's not fun doing that, just for the record. I'm doing it because I'm such a teacher and so passionate about helping. I want to help millions of driven entrepreneurs. So I'm doing it. What I recommend is, when you're ready to be vulnerable and tell your inner story, which is not so much what happened to you, but what you felt your whole life, the real feelings inside. Find somebody in your life that you love and you trust. Tell it to them. All you need to do is tell it once, and you find they didn't leave you and they love you more. So we don't all need to run around and spew our trauma to everyone on the planet. I don't think that that's the idea. And then social media is sometimes the worst for that, because there's just pure evil out there, man. And there's just really wounded people out there, and hurt people. And so you're spewing this to a lot of evil that is just going to bring on more evil and relish in your pain and misery. And hopefully that will change someday, but unfortunately it hasn't changed yet.
More people read Shine, I think it definitely would change.
Let's hope.
We're wrapping up on time here, but I just want to say thank you for your vulnerability, Gino. I really believe that's when we actually get to share our souls, is when we take our masks off and we share exactly that. And so, kudos to you. And Zoe, success leaves clues. And the reality is, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, meditation has brought so many people to a new mindfulness level. And that morning discipline that I use, I don't know if you do morning, night, day, whatever, or all
Morning.
of the above. Morning. Yeah, me as well. Has been something that has transformed many people. So like you said, Zoe, I've kind of, when we were talking so many times, you get kind of skipped to the head of the line. And that's what Gino is doing for everybody. He's giving his life experiences. So now you just got, in a very encapsulated moment, 50 years worth of life hacks.
Yeah.
Of how to be the best human you could be, which is amazing. Gino, what you're doing for people is just incredible. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to help students who are, afraid of becoming an entrepreneur, perhaps. And for Zoe, who's so uncomfortable, right? Being a self-admitted introvert, I'm in that club. Going out in front of people, just what both of you are doing is amazing. So thank you.
Awesome. I'd love to offer up 2 resources that are free that might be helpful for your audience. And so first is, I hope they all read Shine. So let's hope that happens. But if they go to the10disciplines.com, you can write the number 10 or spell out 10, the10disciplines.com. What you'll find there is something we call the true self assessment. And what happens is you fill that assessment out, and it's going to show you how free your true self really is, but it's also going to get your gears turning on some very specific questions. And then also what I think of with your audience of entrepreneurs in the making is I urge you to go to e-leap.com. That's the Entrepreneurial Leap book, and take the Entrepreneur in the Making assessment, a very powerful tool to help you understand if you are truly meant to be an entrepreneur. And so those are two powerful tools that I think are spot on for your audience.
Thank you. it was on my list of questions to ask you about the true self-assessment, to talk about it a little bit more and what it goes into, but we ran out of time.
Well, you can't do
there it is.
everything once, but you can spend time, being able to research and then reach out to Zoe, to the Collegiate Entrepreneur Organization, in order to be able to start your journey of entrepreneurship. That's what it's all about. So, in just a word or two, Zoe, and then Gino, what does entrepreneurship mean to you?
Well, Zoe, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Entrepreneurship to me is the power to share your passion and create with it and impact for good.
Yeah, and what I would say is, so in the Entrepreneurial Leap book, I describe a true entrepreneur has 6 essential traits. Okay, so they are visionary, passionate, problem solver, driven, which we've been talking about the whole time, risk taker, and responsible. And so what I believe is those are truly essential traits. You're born with them, you can't learn them. And so that's the soul of the driven entrepreneur. And so what I believe entrepreneurship is an outlet for those souls. And I have as much respect for a nurse, a teacher, a doctor, a police officer, a ditch digger, a fry cooker at McDonald's. So we're all meant to do something. And the 3 or 4% of us that walk this earth that have those 6 essential traits and those souls, that's what we're destined to do. We're not better or worse than anyone. We are all equals. And that's the blessing we bring to the world. And then the fireman or woman that puts out fires in a house is just as valuable, just as important. And that's the hero souls that they were born with. So there's my answer for what that's worth.
Without a doubt, and entrepreneurship is now. It used to be everybody wanted to be a professional athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And then it used to be everybody wanted to be a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
And now the professional athletes, the rock stars, and the students, and many others want to be entrepreneurs. So our time is now. Yeah. And all of your work is so valuable. And we will have in the show notes links to all of those resources. So thank you so much for your time today, Gino. We really appreciate it. And Zoe, you killed it.
Thank you.
That's awesome. You really did. And what a blast. This was an absolute blast. I can't believe an hour went by.
Yeah, that flew. But I just want to say thank you again, Steve. You summed it up perfectly. It's amazing. The two of you, Steve and Gino, the drive that you have to impact others and help others is so inspiring, and it's the real deal, and that's very, very powerful and amazing to me. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you. Had a blast.
All right. Go impact others, Zoe. Inspire them.